All right, let's just jump right in. What if I told you that you could live in a multi-million-dollar apartment smack in the middle of one of the most expensive cities on Earth and pay absolutely nothing in monthly rent? I know, it sounds completely made up. But today, we're going to pull back the curtain on South Korea's wild rental market and figure out what's the catch.
So to get our heads around this, let's start with a real-life example. Picture this, a flashy 36-story apartment building in Seoul. It's called Castle Gold. I mean, come on, it's got everything. A fitness center, a library, even an indoor golf practice room, all with these amazing views of the Han River. You can walk to a theme park and the 6th tallest building in the world. Buying a 3-bedroom penthouse in a place like this, that'll run you about $1.8 million bucks. But what if you just wanted to rent it?
Well, the rent is zero. Zilch, nada. No monthly fees, no hidden taxes. You could literally move in tomorrow, live there for 2 whole years, and not spend a single penny on rent. And get this isn't some weird lottery or a one-time only promotion. This is normal.
So the big question is, how on earth is this possible? How can rent be free in a mega city like Seoul? And this isn't some niche little loophole we're talking about. About 40%, nearly half of all renters in South Korea are currently paying exactly $0 a month. To understand how, we have to rewind the clock a bit. You see, the story of this crazy rental system is really the story of modern South Korea itself. It was basically forged in the aftermath of a devastating war and a national obsession with building an economic powerhouse.
So after the Korean War wrapped up in 1953, the country was just in ruins. Then in 1961, a new military government took over with one single-minded goal: economic growth, whatever the cost. They decided to copy Japan's playbook and go all in on becoming an industrial giant. And man, did it work. By the time Seoul hosted the Olympics in 1988, the transformation was just staggering. But this miracle on the Han River, as they call it, had a hidden cost. The government was pumping all the nation's capital into huge corporations. You know their names today, Samsung, Hyundai, which left very, very little for ordinary people. And that had a huge, direct impact on everyday families. With all the money going to the big guys, banks had almost nothing left to lend to regular folks. So between 1970 and 1985, only 1 out of every 10 homebuyers in Korea could even get a mortgage. And with no loans, people couldn't buy houses, which, you guessed it, led to a massive housing crisis.
So, you've got this housing shortage on one hand, and you've got strict rent control laws on the other. Homeowners were stuck, so they had to get creative. They resurrected this old, informal system to get around the banks and the government, a system that actually had roots stretching way back to the 1800s.
And that brings us to the system itself. It's called jeonse. Let's break down exactly how it functions, because it is fundamentally different from pretty much any rental system you've ever heard of.
So a jeonse is basically a lease where, instead of paying rent every month, the tenant gives the landlord a gigantic one-time lump sum deposit. And the key part is that deposit is returned in full when the lease is up.
It's really just a simple 3-step dance. First, the tenant pays a deposit, and we're talking a huge deposit, somewhere between 30% and 90% of what the property is actually worth. Second, they live there, usually for 2 years, completely and totally rent-free. And third, when they move out, the landlord gives them back every single penny of that deposit. It's that simple.
And this is the part that really flips the whole idea of renting on its head. Traditional rent is an expense. You pay it, that money vanishes, gone forever. But a jeonse deposit is more like an interest-free loan you're giving to your landlord. You're just letting them hold on to your money for a couple of years, and then you get it all back. It's a completely different mindset.
Okay, so this sounds incredible for the tenant, right? But it raises a massive question. Why in the world would a landlord agree to this? Why would they just give away free rent? What's the catch for them? Well, this is where the whole thing starts to look a little bit like a house of cards.
Back in the day, the answer was easy. In the 60s and 70s, bank interest rates were through the roof. I'm talking like 28% in 1967. A landlord could take your huge deposit, just park it in a bank account, and live comfortably off the interest. Easy money. But as interest rates plummeted, that strategy stopped working. So landlords pivoted to a new game. Use the tenant's deposit as a free loan to buy another property, and then use the next tenant's deposit to buy another and another, all while betting that real estate prices would just keep going up and up.
And that right there is the system's Achilles heel. The whole modern jeonse model, this whole landlord strategy of leveraging deposits to buy more and more property, is built in one single incredibly fragile belief: that housing prices will never ever go down.
When one tenant moves out, the landlord just finds a new one to get the money to pay back the first one. It's a perfect system, as long as the market keeps rising.
Which, of course, brings us to the terrifying question. We all know that markets don't go up forever. So what happens to this delicate little system when property values actually start to drop?
Let's just walk through a quick scenario. Let's say a landlord has a $400,000 apartment. They find a Jianzi tenant who gives them a deposit of, say, $300,000. Great. But 2 years later, that tenant is ready to move out, and whoops, the housing market has dipped. The apartment is now only worth $360,000.
Houston, we have a problem. See, a new tenant is only going to pay a deposit based on the new, lower value, so maybe around $270,000. But the landlord owes the original tenant the full $300,000 they put down. They're suddenly short by 30 grand. Now, imagine that happening to a landlord who owns dozens or even hundreds of these properties. The entire empire can just crumble.
Okay, so given the very real risk of fraud, a market collapse, or just a landlord who's bad with money, why would millions of people be willing to hand over their entire life savings to a total stranger?
The answer, when you get down to it, is actually pretty simple. For a huge number of Koreans, the risk of trusting a stranger is a whole lot better than the certainty of burning cash on monthly rent. The potential reward of living rent-free is just too big to ignore. It's a massive, calculated gamble on their own financial future.
I mean, just look at the two paths. Here in the West, you probably spend a huge chunk of your paycheck on rent while desperately trying to scrape together a down payment. All that rent money, it's gone. Poof. But in the Jianzi model, a young couple can get a government-backed loan for their first deposit, live rent-free for 2 years, and save pretty much every dollar they earn. Then, at the end of the contract, they get their big deposit back, add their savings to it, and can now afford an even bigger deposit for an even nicer place. They call it the Jianzi.
So you see, this isn't just some quirky cultural habit. For millions of young Korean families, climbing that Jianzi ladder is the single most realistic and sometimes the only path they have to ever owning their own home in one of the world's most expensive real estate markets.
So it all comes down to this massive trade-off. On one side of the scale, you have this incredible, life-changing opportunity to live without rent, to save your entire salary, and to get on a fast track to home ownership. But on the other side, you've got the terrifying, catastrophic risk that a market crash or one bad landlord could wipe out every penny you have. And that, right there, is the fundamental bargain at the heart of the entire system. That tiny but very real possibility of absolute financial ruin is the price that makes the dream of free rent possible for everyone else. The risk is what powers the reward.
Which leaves us all with one final question to chew on. For the millions of people who participate in this system every day, they've obviously decided the answer is yes. But looking at it from the outside, you really have to ask yourself, is that a gamble you'd be willing to take?